Hey, welcome to Monday. We are back, and today we'll do a little bit of chatting, and I want to take a look at some symptoms of substance use problems, which are always an interesting thing to take a look at. I'm always a really big fan of self-screening because if we like doing something, we always find a multitude of reasons why we think it's okay and get into really complex ways of rationalizing that what we were doing is okay. And particularly with substance use and stress, I think that's a fairly significant issue because for a lot of people, their substance use has become their primary stress management system. And I talked a little bit about that on Friday when we were talking about this, but if we are under stress and we've started to use any kind of substance to manage that, then as a situation becomes more stressful, then it certainly creates a huge risk of increasing the substance use. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. And I'm going to go over Canada's low risk drinking guidelines and Canada's low risk cannabis use guidelines, just to provide a little bit of additional information. So I just got to go find another screen here. So bear with me for a second. And I have to, sorry, this allows you to see my speed at which I think. And I don't know if you can see that. That's a rhinoceros. This is a sweatshirt that the Boldest High School Entrepreneurship Group did a couple of years ago on endangered species. It's one of my favorites. Okay, there we go. So this is a self-check. So I'm going to go through 11 questions about drug and alcohol stuff and keep track either on your fingers. Since there's 11 questions, you might want to use a piece of paper and a pencil in case you run out of fingers. Hopefully you don't run out of fingers, but keep track on which ones are true for you. And then we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So the first one is, do you take a substance in larger amounts or for longer periods of time than you meant to, that you intended to? So for example, you were going to have a couple of drinks and you ended up having 6 or 7. You were going to have a quick hoot of weed and it ended up in a much longer and more complicated session. So if that just happened once in your life, that's not a particularly big issue. But if that tends to be a pattern, if that's something that recurs fairly frequently for you, that you sort of get yourself in worse shape than you intended to, or you drank more or used more than you planned on using, that's a sign that you are starting to have what we affectionately refer to as a substance use disorder. Second question, wanting to cut down or stop using the substance but not managing to. So that's asking you, have you ever said to yourself or to somebody else, yeah, I know I got to cut down, I have to slow down, or I'm going to stop, and that didn't happen. You continued to use, or maybe you quit for a week or two, but then it started again and went back to the same level or worse than it was at before. Next question. You spend a lot of time getting, using, or recovering from the use of a substance. So, like, were you one of the people that was lined up at the liquor store the other day because you had a panic that maybe they were going to close the liquor stores? Are you always planning when your next substance use event is going to be? Is it something that you're thinking about a lot? Are you waking up many mornings thinking, oh my God, I did it again. I drank too much or used too much and I feel awful. I gotta, so you're always getting over it. Or, are you worried about the financial piece of this? Is this starting to interfere with your opportunity to spend money on other stuff. So is it becoming a big issue in your life? And like I said, when I started, if that happened once and it never happened again in terms of like losing control again, it's not a huge issue. But if if you've said to yourself a few times, I got to slow this down, and it's not working, then again, something's not working for you. Cravings are urges to use. So when you start to feel a little anxiety or a little stress, do you immediately start thinking, oh, if I could just have a drink, or if I could just smoke a little bit of weed, or pop a pill, or whatever? Is it, uh, does that become a fairly strong urge for you? Cravings are also, getting excited about the fact that, hey, I'm going to go drink, or I'm going to go be able to use at such and such a time, and you get excited about that. That's also an indicator of a craving. So not managing to, well, I got to move me there because you can't see. I can't see either. I'll put me down there. Not managing to do what you should at work, home, or school because of substance use. So is this affecting you? Are you having to check yourself to see if it's okay for you to drive? Are you missing work on occasion, like Mondays, or leaving early Fridays because you're starting to interfere with this stuff? And I know I was talking to somebody yesterday who stopped drinking for Lent, and this wasn't a person that had anything that resembled an alcohol problem, but they were probably drinking a bottle of wine or a little bit more than that a week. And what they said to me yesterday was, it's been like 3 weeks that I haven't used any alcohol, and my energy's better, my mind's clear, I haven't felt this good for a long time. And I hear that over and over and over again from people. And again, it's that issue of, I'm not that bad, or it's just wine, or it's just weed. I'm not using opiates, or I'm not drunk in the gutter. But too much of anything, and the too much is difficult for people to get their heads around sometimes, because uh, it doesn't have to be that much before it starts to cause you a problem. So has this affected your performance at work, at home, or at school? Are you disconnected from your family, or your kids, or your friends, or your romantic partner because of your substance use? Is it getting in the way of anything? Continuing, it's sort of an extension question of this, continuing to use even when it causes problems in relationships. And for teenagers, one of your primary and most important relationships is with your parents. So if you are constantly lying to them about what you're doing or where you're going so that you can use a substance, that's going to interfere with that relationship, whether you really realize it or not. And so we need to take a look at that, because we're hiding from them. If you're, in a social relationship or a romantic relationship with somebody, is this something that's come up more than once about how much you're drinking or how much you're using? And maybe they'd like you to quit or slow down or whatever, but that doesn't seem to happen. That means that you're continuing to use even though it's causing a problem. And then the next one, giving up important social, occupational, or recreational activities because of substance use. So have you stopped doing something because it got in the way of your substance use? So maybe exercising, or maybe playing on a team, or maybe uh, participating in anything. Have you stopped doing that? Maybe because it didn't feel as interesting as it used to. And one of the huge problems with substance use is that because it raises the level at which we're going to feel pleasure from anything, it's called our hedonic plateau. Substance use creates a strong positive feeling. That's part of the thing it does, because it changes our brain chemistry. But then normal stuff like hanging out with your kids or hanging out with your friends or playing a board game or doing a crossword puzzle or something just doesn't seem to give you the pleasure that it used to, that's a sign that that substance use has changed your brain and is starting to interfere with your ability to get pleasure out of normal stuff. So if you're starting to give up stuff that you used to like and drink or use in place of that, that's another issue that you need to pay attention to. And then using substances again and again, even when it puts you in danger. So the biggest thing for just about everybody is the whole impaired driving issue. And if you are, regularly driving with any substance in your system, you're putting yourself in danger. If you're going to work with substances in your system, particularly if you're in any kind of a safety sensitive job, even though you think it doesn't affect you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So impaired driving, risk of overdose, anything like that, if that's happening, that's another sign that you're wandering into the field of a person that has a substance use disorder. And then continuing to use even when you know you have a physical or psychological problem that could have been caused or made worse by the substance. So the two biggest issues are anxiety and depression. Both alcohol and cannabis tend to make anxiety worse and depression worse. But we play this game in our head where, well, it makes me feel better. And there's some truth to that. It might make you think you're feeling better for a little while. Actually, what it does is it makes you feel less. It stops that level of discomfort for a little while. But because any mood modifying substance disrupts brain chemistry, if there's a fundamental problem underneath that, like anxiety or depression, it's going to make it worse. It's going to complicate things. And they also can create those problems. I was talking to a kid yesterday who uh, was smoking too much of really high potency dab stuff. And he's got a huge anxiety disorder right now. Like he can't, it really disrupted his brain chemistry. And it's probably going to take a couple of weeks for that to settle down. And he was smart enough to say, oh, this stuff's screwing me up. I'm going to leave it alone. But unfortunately, lots of people, because they're stuck in that thinking that it actually helps them, uh, they go and use more. And it gives you sometimes a few minutes or an hour of relief, but then the problem continually gets worse. So is that happening to you? So if you've got anxiety and or depression or another mental health issue, is your substance use making that worse? Because it probably is. The other big issue is sleep problems. Again, both alcohol and marijuana interfere with sleep function. They both can kind of knock you out, but the whole REM sleep doesn't really happen, and then you don't rest properly. So that's another one. Needing more of the substance to get the effect that you want, like developing tolerance. Check that. Look at what your use was like a year ago or 6 months ago, and if you're using more in quantity or more often in frequency, then uh, your tolerance is increasing. And the question is are you okay with that? Is number one, it's going to cost you more money, but the more you use, the more negative impact it certainly has on what's going on with you. Uh, and then developing withdrawal symptoms, which can be relieved by taking more of the substance. So, if one of the primary withdrawal symptoms of cannabis is you start to get irritable, and so you'll go and smoke some more, or do some more gummy or whatever. It doesn't matter how you get it into yourself. Same thing with alcohol. If you're starting to feel stressed or anxious, is that what you use to uh, uh, to eliminate that feeling that you're having. That's using it to manage your withdrawal symptom. So, so sorry, that was 11 questions. So if you said yes to 3 of those, then you have what is considered the beginnings of a substance use disorder. If you have more than 3, then you have a substance use disorder, which is the new term, or the probably the not new necessarily new, but better term for addiction. And addiction is that word that's filled with a lot of stigma. So, we can say, well, I can't possibly be an alcoholic or a drug addict because I've got this or I've got that or I do this or I do that. And and so we start comparing us to worst case scenarios, and then we make ourselves look okay. But these 11 questions are a very accurate way of self-assessing where you are at. So if you've got 3 or more on here, and you absolutely don't think that you have a problem, if you're sitting there thinking he has no idea what he's talking about, then just like take a break for a month and see how you feel. Like just leave it alone for a month. If you don't have a problem, it shouldn't be a problem leaving it alone. If the idea of leaving it alone is really uncomfortable for you, then that's telling you something else. That's telling you that okay, this stuff is a bigger issue than maybe I thought it was. So please check that out. So the low risk drinking guidelines were developed, I think, in 2011 or 2012 as a way for Canadians to check their alcohol use. And we hadn't really had those before. And it doesn't say no risk, it says low risk, because alcohol in itself is a significant health issue, even in small quantities. It's a factor in breast cancer, it's a factor in stomach, esophageal, bowel cancers. It isn't uh, it isn't a health tonic drink. On the other hand, if you're going to choose to use alcohol, understanding what puts you in a lower risk category can be pretty useful. So uh, the the guidelines basically state for women, and we're not picking on females for any reason, but there's a couple of things different about, well, there's lots of things different about women, but there's 2 things different about women in terms of alcohol. One is that they have less body water than males do. So when they drink, their blood alcohol level goes up higher. And secondly, women are missing one enzyme that helps to metabolize alcohol in their liver. And so again, the alcohol gets metabolized more slowly, so their blood alcohol level will stay up a little bit longer. If you want to check out a Netflix documentary about this, there's a pretty interesting one on Netflix called "The Truth About Alcohol." It was filmed in Britain, so the stats are a little bit different than Canada, but the science is essentially the same. So that's a fairly interesting little look at what's going on with alcohol. But for the Canadian low risk drinking guidelines, for women, it's no more than 2 drinks a day and 2 days a week with no drinking. So a maximum of 10 drinks a week. So uh, what that converts to in alcohol is, and there you can see it up on the top. So a beer counts as one, a can or bottle of cooler counts as 1 drink, 5-ounce glass of wine is 1 drink, and a shot of hard alcohol is 1 drink. So, for example, there's 5 glasses of wine in a bottle of wine. So, if you're a female drinking wine by yourself, maximum 2 drinks a day, 2 bottles a week, and 2 days with no drinking. For a man, for a male, it's 3 drinks a day. So same conditions, no more, sorry, I got itchy eye. No more than 3 drinks and a day, and 2 days a week with 2 days a week with no drinking. And you can't save all the drinks up for one day. It doesn't work that way. So I usually get asked that question. So check that out. And then low risk cannabis use guidelines. And again, with both cannabis and alcohol, any use by an adolescent is not okay. Adolescent brains are developing brains, and either of these substances has huge potential to interfere with that development. So uh, these aren't for kids; they're for adults. Uh, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that afterwards. But so I'll leave this up for a minute. You can read it if you want, or you can pause this when you're looking at it. Uh, those are kind of how it lays it out. And here are the 10 ways. So number one, remembering every form of cannabis use poses risks to your health. This isn't medicine. And there's lots of misbelief about what cannabis is good for. Uh, and what they're talking about here is recreational use. So you're always better not to use any. I mean, if you're smoking it, there's nothing good about smoking anything. And any of these drugs dysregulate brain chemistry to some degree or another. Uh, the second one, you shouldn't use this drugs, and it says particularly younger than 16. And we've known for a long time that addiction is a pediatric onset problem. And so the younger you start, the more likely it is that you're going to develop an issue. Number three is like, it's better to not use that really high potency stuff. Uh, this kid that I was talking about, I think was doing dabs, and that product is particularly strong. Usually above 80% THC without other cannabinoids in it. So if you can use a lower strength cannabis with sort of an equal balance of CBD and THC, that's going to have a less harmful effect. Number four is don't use synthetic cannabis products. And we haven't seen a lot of that around Western Canada, but some places in the East and the States, there's all sorts of synthetic cannabis products showing up, which can be really dangerous. Uh, Number five is don't smoke it, like find another way to get it into yourself. And number six, which kind of goes against how people do this, but don't like pull it as far into your lungs and hold it as long as you can, which, increases the supply of the drug, but it's harder on your lungs. And uh, number seven, the more frequently you use cannabis, the more likely you are to develop a health problem. And it's really interesting the way people look at this drug, because, most people wouldn't get drunk every day. If they were getting drunk every day, they would start to think, oh, maybe this is a problem. But for some reason, that thinking doesn't seem to apply to cannabis for a lot of people. So it's okay to get high every day because it's cannabis, which is really bad thinking. Like typically, if you do something a little bit once a week, it's not going to cause you a problem. But if you start to do something every day, it's going to significantly increase risk. Number eight, cannabis impairs your ability to drive a car, operate other machinery, or anything sharp or whatever. What they say is wait at least 6 hours after you use before you engage in anything that might be physically risky to yourself or people around you. And number nine, some people are more likely to develop problems from cannabis use, specifically people with personal or family history of psychosis or substance use problems. And that's true with everything. But cannabis can really increase the risk of psychiatric issues, psychosis. I've seen more and more and more people develop psychosis issues from really heavy cannabis use, and particularly because it's getting so much stronger than it used to be. And then uh, 10 just says, avoid combining any of the risky behaviors that are described above. So not too much, not too often, not too strong. Just like typically, like be careful, like think about what you're doing and make sure that you're in control, that you're using it isn't using you. And then we'll finish up here with my favorite 4 questions. So is what you're thinking true? Is it really true? Because we lie to ourselves. So with those 11 questions, if you thought, hey, there's nothing the matter with what I'm doing. If if you had 3, 4, or 5 or more of those that are true for you, then what you were telling yourself wasn't true. And how you were feeling or acting because of how you were thinking. How you were thinking about your substance use made it okay for you to continue to do that. And then number 4, how would you feel or act if you thought differently? And so, I've given you a chance to self-evaluate, self-check, given you a little bit of information on kind of what's a reasonable amount if you're going to do it. And as I said, and I'll say it again, neither of these substances are good for teenagers. The reality is also that, if teenagers are going to use it, the same kinds of things apply. Like not too much, not all the time, and it needs to be in control. And again, I'm not saying that it's okay, but that's kind of where it needs to go. So hopefully you find this useful and perhaps interesting and a good self-check piece. If anybody wants to comment on this or ask any questions, just use the feed underneath. And as I said before, I was going to try and do these as Facebook Live shows, but I just don't have the technology to make that work really well for me. So these are just pre-recorded, so I'll put them up. They'll stay up as long as we leave them up. So for kind of forever, which is everything that happens on Facebook is forever at some level or another. And so if you have questions, comments, please feel free. And again, as I asked last week, if you found something that's really working for you in terms of how to occupy time or keep yourself busy or keep yourself interested in life while we've got these huge changes going on in what we usually do, I'd love little videos or comments that I could share on here. So thank you, y'all. Have a good day. And as always, be careful out there. It's a dangerous world. Now, I got to figure out how to get this back to where it's supposed to be. I have no idea what I'm doing. Yeah, you're stuck with me till I figure this out. No, I'm stuck. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Nobody's perfect. That's the other thing that I'm quite interested. There we go. I'm back. Yeah, nobody's perfect. I can't always figure out everything. So thanks for listening. Thanks for paying attention. And I'll be back tomorrow. Take care.